So continuing with the horror movie month that I've been doing here on YouTube, we're up to day 5, which is a few days ago now. The next couple of movies that I've watched as part of horror movie month were actually recommended to me by one of my absolute greatest friends, Sam, Bellucci Media Geek here on YouTube. He spent the weekend here and brought a couple of horror movies with him, knowing that I was doing this series of videos. And the first of which, on day 5 that we watched, was Peeping Tom. This is the film by Michael Powell, which actually predates Hitchcock's Psycho, but for whatever reason isn't as popular or held in the same regard. Now, Sam actually prefers this to Psycho. Now, I won't go that far because Psycho is one of my all-time favourite movies, but this film was actually very impressive and I did really enjoy it. The story essentially follows the character of Mark, who is a bit of a loner and a voyeur. He kills women while filming it on a small camera, which is sometimes either hidden in his clothing somewhere, but he's essentially a voyeur serial killer. What this film does really well is, first of all, and this is something, Sam and I were discussing it at length while we were watching it, the female characters in this are very well written. The love interest is actually an intelligent female character and really understands the character of Mark, the killer, quite deeply. And although it is a film that doesn't really go into a lot of exposition, it doesn't tell you what the characters are thinking, it implies a lot, but it certainly implies that she knows, or at least suspects, what's going on with him, as does her mother, so minor spoilers. But I found it quite refreshing to see female characters written in an intelligent way and to make them some of the most intelligent characters in the film rather than just have them running away screaming. And the guy who plays Mark, whose name escapes me, I think it might be Carl Bohm, but he's brilliant. His performance is very interesting because he is essentially a loner who you do feel a little bit sorry for, in the same way that Anthony Perkins was in Psycho. But he is also quite a intimidating presence physically. He is quite intimidating, and the way the film is shot in full Technicolor, which again sets it apart from Psycho, really does lend itself to making the character a presence, if that makes sense. So the film itself, it is quite creepy, and it is very effective. There are certain scenes in this, one scene when he tells one of his potential victims to act on camera for him, and he's trying to find the look of fear on her face. This scene goes on for quite a while and is very tense and quite unsettling, so I would certainly say that it's a very effective little horror movie. And this is actually Sam's copy, which he left here so that I could do this video. But it is certainly one that I would pick up if I can find it cheap enough, because it has had a fully restored Blu-ray release. So that's Peeping Tom. We then watched another of Sam's suggestions, a film that I hadn't actually heard of until he brought it up, and that's Frailty. Now, this is directed by and starring Bill Paxton, and Matthew McConaughey is in this as well. And essentially it's the story of Matthew McConaughey's character turns up at a police station where a detective works who has been hunting a serial killer known as the God's Hand Killer, and weaves him a story about his childhood and about his father, and essentially implicates his brother as the killer. That's not really a spoiler because this happens in the first few minutes of the movie. He turns up and says, "I know who the killer is, it's my brother, and let me tell you why." This film works for me. I find that McConaughey's scenes of conversation with Powers Booth's character, the detective who is actually hunting the serial killer, to be very interesting and multi-layered. A lot of what is said has double meanings, and there's a lot left unsaid as well. And it is really interesting in the same way that Kevin Spacey does so in The Usual Suspects. Now, while I'm not saying it's as good as that movie, because Usual Suspects is fantastic, this is a very interesting little horror film. Now, I know that some people who've seen this would probably say that it's a psychological thriller or a supernatural thriller, but to me, and to Sam's credit, he did say that he considers it to be an out-and-out horror film, and I would agree. A lot of what's in here is straight out of other horror movies. Now, essentially, once Matthew McConaughey gets talking, he talks about how his father, when he was a child, his father became a serial killer, and that's the film. Now, I won't go too much into the plot and how it develops, because it does have a certain ambiguity as to whether or not certain characters are going insane or telling the truth. It remains ambiguous all the way through the film, and doesn't, although it hints at what's going on at the end, it doesn't out and out blatantly explain everything. It lets the audience kind of make up their own mind. So I found that to be very interesting. It's an interesting little film. It's more a character piece than anything. The children in this who play Matthew McConaughey and his brother, back in the past, the father's played by Bill Paxton, but the children are brilliant in this. The child actors, I found to be very impressive, given the subject matter, which is difficult for a kid to wrap their head around. I imagine it'd be difficult for an adult to wrap their head around, but they do really well. Bill Paxton, as well in this, is great in his role. The direction, some of it is quite visually inventive, and some of it is quite laboured. At times, it can look like a straight-to-DVD movie. It got a theatrical release. It was always intended to have a theatrical release, but just at certain moments, it can look a bit straight-to-DVD ish, but that really is a minor complaint, because I don't think it had the biggest budget in the world. But it, like I say, it more than makes up with it for the makes up for it rather, with great acting, great performances, an interesting script. For the most part, the direction is very interesting. So I would highly recommend Frailty. Like I said, I hadn't heard of this before I watched it, so that's one that I would definitely recommend. That brings us on to day 7 now? Yeah, day 7 I watched Kill List, which is a hitman movie, but it's a horror movie wrapped around a hitman movie. It's really difficult to explain. It's directed by Ben Wheatley and essentially follows the plot of two hitmen. I've just dropped it on the floor. It basically follows the plot of two hitmen, one called Jay, who work together for many years, and they take a new job. And they're given a kill list of targets that they have to go through. However, it really takes a turn for the strange when their targets thank them for killing them, and they become embroiled in a sort of conspiracy. And I don't want to ruin it for anyone, because it is a fantastic little film. It's a film that the first time I watched it, I wasn't sure whether or not I liked it. But it's one that really stuck with me, and I kept mulling it over in my head, and have gone back to it. I've revisited this, so it is a film that I would recommend. The performances in it are great. It's a very English horror movie. In the interplay between the main character of Jay and his wife, who I believe is played by an actress from The Descent, which was one of my earlier horror movies. The interplay and dynamic in that relationship is, unfortunately, it is realistic, and I think we all know couples like them. So it's a very almost documentary style, hyper-real drama to begin with, that takes many twists and turns. As I say, it's about two hitmen, but then it becomes a horror movie, and it certainly does kind of emulate classics. The one that springs to mind, which even looking at the cover, you can see that this will homage it, but the one that springs to mind is The Wicker Man, which I love. It is a very interesting film. I know that a lot of people complain that the ending is too ambiguous and they can't wrap their head around what actually happened, but if you listen to directors or read the interviews that the director Ben Wheatley has given, he does go some ways as to explaining the plot, but everything that he says is there. The seeds that are sown for the ending throughout the entire film. So I know some people have complained that the ending felt tacked on and inconsistent with the rest of the movie, but I found that the seeds were certainly sown from the beginning of the movie. So Kill List is great. I wouldn't watch it if you have a weak stomach, because a lot of the violence in this is ultra violent. It's some of the most realistic gore effects I think I've ever seen, but yeah, so if you have a weak stomach, maybe think twice. Otherwise, Kill List is a great, tightly wound little horror movie, and I would recommend it. And today's horror movie, which I actually watched this afternoon, is Insidious. This is one that I reviewed with DVD Weasel way back when, so I won't say too much, but other than to say it's directed by James Wan and written by Lee Winnell. These are the guys who did the original Saw film. They've done Dead Silence, Death Sentence as well. Insidious is basically about a haunted child being terrorised by demons, and his family are terrorised by demons. It's a very enjoyable little roller coaster of a film. There are no false scares in this. While it does rely quite heavily on jump scares, they are quite frightening, to be honest. A lot of the imagery in this is very unsettling and will stick with you. The performances are great by Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne, the two main characters in this. They play the parents. You have Lynn Shay and Barbara Hershey as well, so a great cast in this movie. I would definitely recommend this. It's produced by Oren Peli, who did the original Paranormal Activity. So if you like your sort of haunted house, ghost, demon sort of horror movies, this one is one of the best to be released in many years. I think this will probably be in my top 10 horror movies of all time. Not near the top, mind you, but it's so enjoyable that it's one that I revisit quite regularly, so that's Insidious. And what I'll do is make another of these videos in a few days to talk about the other films that I've been watching as part of Horror Movie Month. Thanks everyone for your continued support. Please rate, comment, subscribe and all that brilliant stuff. I really appreciate it. Thank you.